Welcome back to another episode of the Parent Network podcast. I am your host, Ashley Aites. Now, today, y'all, I want to talk about just the journey of parenting and what we received from our parents or our guardians or our caregivers, and whether or not it was beneficial for us, whether we used some of those tools that we received or whether we just threw the whole thing away. You know how they say, throw the whole thing away. So I want to talk about that. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to put a poll because I want to hear from you all about whether or not what you received in your childhood has been beneficial for you in your journey in parenting. So don't forget to do the poll at the end of this episode. So I'm just going to kind of briefly share about what I received from childhood and how some of the things I used in my first phase of parenting, and I literally had to throw it away. Some of what I've had to shift to make and tweak to my own, and some of it which I just did not use any of it because it was not beneficial at all. So let's get into today's episode. Growing up for me, um, expressing emotions, being verbal, being curious, having the autonomy to explore was not a thing. I when I tried, let me start with that. When I tried to do those things, I was told that I was nosy. I was in grown people's business. And now, while I understand that children do have a role to play and they should not always be in the midst of adult things, there are some times where a child can listen. And I'll get into that later. So, I was told all of those things. And after hearing it a few times, eventually I was just disbarred. I'll use that word. I was disbarred from the congregation because it wasn't appropriate for me or wasn't deemed appropriate for me. And so I spent a lot of time playing by myself, playing sometimes with my brother when he was there. I was watching cartoons, things of that nature, busy stealing fruit, busy stealing money just to get attention, the things that you do as a kid when you dealt with rejection, those things. And I remember my grandmother telling me one time that you are so nosy, your nose is going to turn red. And I was just like, what? Like, I didn't even know what that meant. And she told me another time, you're so much like your mother. And it left me confused there because I didn't know if that was a good thing or if that was a bad thing. Because I mean, she's my mom. So shouldn't I be like her? Still no explanation. Now, as I continue to journey into childhood, grew up, teenage years, adulthood, I get pregnant, 19, have my son. There were certain things that I knew that I just was not going to take with me. When I had an incident as a child and I tried to tell an adult, I wasn't received. It wasn't heard. When I cried as a child to an adult, it wasn't received. It was brushed over with, you'll be okay, get over it, or I could give you something to cry about. Usually, when the phrase, I'll give you something to cry about, came about, it was because I was getting a whooping. Now, on the next episode, I wanted to talk more about punishment and discipline. So just put a pin in that thought. Now, that caused for my emotions to literally be stopped up. Stopped up. I mean, stop up, y'all. Like, I'm not crying around people. I'm not allowing anybody to see what I'm feeling, what I'm going through, because why would I do that? Why is that necessary when it's not received from those who are supposed to love me? Fast forward to my son, my oldest son was 7 at the time. And I remember yelling at him about something. I don't know what I was yelling at him about, but I can remember him looking at me and just being very still faced. And I'm like, okay, he has no emotion here. What's going on? And after I had got done yelling, I remember the Holy Spirit telling me, don't yell at him. He's not that child. Now, at that time, y'all, me and the Lord, we were not besties how we are now. It was just like I knew him, he knew me, but I was not walking out my belief in any capacity. And so it kind of threw me off when I heard, stop yelling at him because he's not that child. Because who are you talking to? Like, what's happening here? So I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And a few weeks later, it hit me on what that meant because my son and I, we were in a conversation and we were talking, and I was asking him how he was feeling and what was going on with him because I just kind of noticed a change in his disposition and in his mannerism. And he was saying how he was sad, and then he started to cry. Now I'm like, oh, shoot. I'm entering a phase of parenting that, is a little bit different for me because around this age where he was, I was told that I was not supposed to be crying. So I know that I don't want to give that same message to him. So what do I do? And it did. It freaked me out a little bit because I'm like, oh my God, like, do I tell him boys don't cry? Because I don't subscribe to that thought process, but I don't really know how to console him in the moment. So I did the best that I could. And I asked him, I said, well, why are you crying? Like, what's going on? Talk to me. And he's like, how he missed his dad and, X, Y, and Z. And it pulled at an emotion within me that was suppressed, where I began to cry with him. And we cried together. And I told him, I said, it's gonna be okay. I remember holding him and sitting him on my lap, and I said, it's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. Like, you're gonna see your dad again. Like, everything is going to work out. And I think that was the first time he saw me cry, and I had experienced him crying because of how he was feeling. Now, that's so important for me, y'all. And it's so important for us to understand that if, as a child, your emotions were suppressed, when it comes up in adulthood, when you are parenting, if you're like me, it's like, oh my goodness, like, what do I do with this? Now, some people, they might have an opposite experience where they're able to say, emphatically, like, I controlled my child. It just was innate in me. Like, it was innate, but it was foreign. So it was very much like mom to the rescue. But how does mom rescue this child when he's feeling this way? Because mom was never rescued when she was feeling that way. And so from there, this whole new world kind of opened up for me as far as emotional capacity was concerned, because I always associated physical touch with that of the sexual nature. Listen, God, I told y'all these podcasts are going to be very real and very raw. So because I associated it with that, having these feelings and these emotions of sadness, and grief and sorrow, now I have language for it. Then I didn't. And so I was trying to help my son navigate through grief when I never had that navigation system for me. And we journeyed through it as best as we could together. And it opened me up to saying, like, you need to probably go on a journey, Ashley, to explore, some of these things. But even then, y'all, I wasn't thinking about it. It wasn't until a year later that I was like, it's time for you to face your demons. It's time for you to face whatever's going on with you, because after that moment, for a year, like, I was very, very angry. I was very emotional. I was very hurt. I was very broken. I was in a very emotionally toxic relationship, and I knew that I couldn't do that anymore. So I had to get out of that. And it was just so much that was going on with me that I was like, I don't want to spill this onto them, but I'm spilling it onto my children because I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how to reach out to the people that are here to support me and explain to them this is what I'm feeling. Mind you, I had a support system, but they did not know what was going on with me because I did not have language to express it. They knew a few things, but in like fashion at the time. because I dealt with so much pride, it was just like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, I'm handling it. We're good. It's all good. X, Y, and Z. It wasn't all good. I wasn't good. In hindsight, I probably dealt with depressive episodes and never had the language for it because, again, in the African American community, especially with women, the way in which depression can show up for us and the way in which we react to it is very, very different because a lot of things we have taken on as a cultural norm is very, very toxic. And so, like I said, in hindsight, yes, I have probably dealt with depressive episodes. Didn't know what it was called, especially when I was lashing out, angry, very emotional, had moments where I didn't want to do anything. It's I don't want to say it's a classic symptom of depression, but it is some of those were symptoms of depression. And so I remember laying on my bed, y'all, and I was just crying, 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 crying. And I told the Lord, I was like, listen, like if you're real and if you are someone, that I'm supposed to like do this thing with, do this relationship with. Cause I was a church kid. I grew up in church. But what I saw at church and home was very different. And that's what turned me off because I thought that how can this God that everybody worships and praises and you do all of these things to not be able to help the people that are supposed to love you right. Just catch that, y'all. Just catch that. How do you allow the people that are supposed to love you not love you right? And you don't even know what it is that you did. A lot of the times in my childhood, I didn't know what I did or didn't do to not receive the love that I was supposed to have. And so it then flowed into relationships as an adult, friendships, romantic relationships. I would choose people. I would try to control the narrative. I would act in a certain way to get a response, manipulative behavior, all of these things, all because this was the broken little girl within me that never knew what to do. So as I'm sitting here and I'm talking, I'm crying and I'm asking God, like, hey, if you're real, like, you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to walk with me. You're going to have to do this thing with me. And I remember telling him, if this is real, I'm going to start going back to church and something's got to change. Well, of course, he responded and things did change, but I didn't know that the change that was going to happen was going to start with me. I had this idea that, everything was going to be washed away and I was going to be like this new person and loving and all of these things. But here's the thing, y'all. When we start to change, it's not an instantaneous thing that happens with us. We have to go through the process. I didn't know anything about no process. I didn't know anything about any of that type of stuff. And I remember sitting in a service one time and the pastor was speaking and he was like, the first person that we have relationship with and that we receive love from is our parents, whether that's mother or father, whomever raised you. And if the relationship that you have with that individual is estranged, then it becomes your responsibility when you know what to do to have a conversation. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh my God, he is talking to me. And I remember saying, okay, I don't know what this is going to look like, but I need to have a conversation with my mom. And I asked my brother to be the facilitator of this conversation. And this happened, I was 28. And he agreed to be the facilitator of the conversation. And so I told my mom, hey, I want to talk to you. Would you be willing to listen to me? And she's like, sure. Now, my mom deals with levels of pride from the toe all the way up. And so, her not being able to control the narrative or control the situation or control what came out of my mouth was very unfamiliar to her. So, she already was on guard and did not want to receive what it is that I was going to say. Well, y'all, we got to her place and we're sitting down. I sit down on the couch and she sits down, adjacent, not adjacent, but opposite to me. And my brother is opposite of her. And I open up my mouth and began to speak, but no words came out, y'all. Years and years and years of tears is what came out. I was very much like inconsolable in the moment, and it was shocking to me because I had never cried in front of my mom. I am 28 years old at that time, and I had never cried in front of my mom. So imagine all of that coming up. I mean, that's all that came out my mouth. For the first 5 minutes was tears. And she's looking at me, and my brother was looking, but my brother kind of understood that this is a cleansing process for you, but I'm going to have to go through it myself. So once I collected my words, I told her, how I felt in childhood, what was going on with me, things that I felt she should have protected me from, and it didn't really go over the way that I saw it in my mind. But middle of the conversation, what clicked for me was this is for you, Ashley, and not for her. This is the part of the process, the beginning of you healing. And from then on, I started to go to therapy. I started to seek out professional counseling to figure out what was going on with me. And I went through that process, and I even did EMDR treatment because initially I thought, like, I don't really have no trauma like that. Small things just happened to me. And then as I began to talk with my therapist, she was like, you may think that trauma has to do with PTSD. She was like, but you actually do have PTSD with certain situations in your life. And the way she broke it down to me, y'all, I was like, oh my God. My mind, I'm a little dramatic. So I'm like, oh my God, I've been crazy this whole time. Not crazy, delusional, but I just never had language. I didn't have support. I didn't have the things and the tools that I needed to continue moving in a healthy life. So I'm raising these children, but I'm very much resentful inside. And I'm very much still a child in a lot of areas. So when they would do certain things, it would trigger me. And so the way I responded to that trigger was to yell, was to retreat, retreat in my emotions, retreat in my affections. It was very much a coping mechanism. And I'm saying all of this, y'all, because I want there to be this recognition for us as parents that have dealt with any type of level of trauma, not to be shamed by what you experienced in your life and how it has possibly showed up with you in parenting, but to give you courage enough to again share your story, but to receive the help that you need, and to hear that number two, like, you're not alone. So as I'm journeying again, into parenting, and I'm healing and I'm learning new things, it hit me that I needed to apologize to my kids, y'all. Apologize to them for not allowing my emotional capacity to be seen, because I didn't even know what an emotional capacity was. I knew that I didn't want to give them what I received, but inadvertently, I was giving them parts of me that I received because I didn't know how to do anything different. And so I remember sitting down with my kids, and this was right before pandemic, and we were talking, and I was asking them, how do you view me as a mom? What do you think? What can I do better? I, I never got that opportunity to do that with my mom. Never, like never. It was always, I'm the mom, I'm the parent. You say, you do what I say, and that's it. There was no question and there was no communication. One of the biggest things that I am passionate about, and my kids can attest to this, I am going to communicate with you. Now, how I communicated in the first stage of my parenting versus how I communicate now is vastly different. And like I said, it is okay to pivot in parenting because we know that there's no rule book, there is no guide, no cheat code that comes with this journey. We are going to have to pivot. And I don't want you to feel shamed or embarrassment for pivoting. I want us to know that it is okay to, number one, forgive yourself for what you didn't receive and what you didn't know and what you didn't give. Number two, forgive those that might have raised you and didn't give you what you needed to be healthy. And I use healthy very loosely because our emotional health, I don't believe, was something that was necessity to our parents or to those that raised us if we experience certain things. It was like, this is what I have to give you, receive it, boom, leave it alone. Trying to tote the line or ask certain questions, especially in my home, it wasn't received. I tried to ask my mom about her childhood. I was hit with the, why do you need to know? What does it matter? That was the past. Again, that was something that I did not want to do with my children. So I opened up my life to them and allowed them to ask me questions. And I remember the first time we did that, and they was looking at me like I was crazy. They was like, "Are you serious?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's okay to ask me anything." I gave them a 3-minute timer, and they huddled together and they asked me certain things from childhood, lessons in high school, things of that nature. And I answered them truthfully because for me, learning how to be vulnerable, I didn't want that to be taught to them in a manipulative way. I dealt with enough of that. They even dealt with like bouts of that with my mother. And once I started to see that, I immediately cut that off. That's where those boundaries come into play. When I started to heal and I started to recognize that some things are just not going to happen anymore. Like they said, the buck stops with me, it stopped with me. So you're not going to get to put that on my children. You're not going to be able to do what you desire to do under the guise of your their grandmother. Those are some of the things that she was saying. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. Grandmother or not, they're children, they're humans. You respect what they say, just as if you would want them to respect what you say. And I think that we have to learn that as parents, that even though we might have our parents still alive and we didn't receive the tools that we needed from them, it's okay to teach them about boundaries. Whether they receive it or not is not up to you, but it is for you to enforce and apply those boundaries as you are healing and as you are breaking generational cycles. And so that's what I've been doing, y'all, applying those boundaries. And thankfully, for the last, I would say, year or so, my mom has kind of been understanding those boundaries and she's been respecting them. And then I've gotten to a point where I realize that I don't have to explain myself to anyone. Those of us that dealt with rejection, abandonment, the perfectionism, pride, all of those things, we had this idea that we had to over explain to other people for them to understand us and accept what we were saying. I no longer operate that way. And I no longer allow my children to operate that way. I want to know what you're feeling. I want to know how you're thinking. But even if you don't have language in the moment for how you're feeling and what it is that's going on with you, I'm not going to try to manipulate your emotions to suit what I want you to say. And I'm sure that people have dealt with that. Some listeners may have dealt with that, and you might still be dealing with that. But it's okay to not have language all the time. It's okay to sit with what you're feeling and try to unravel that. And this is why I always go back to the Proverbs where it talks about that in the multitude of counsel, there is safety. We have to have community. Like it's so important. If I didn't have community to help me through this journey of healing and unlearning and reparenting and starting over, I don't know where I would be. I started off in life not having the support that I needed, but God has a way of journeying with us, even in the moments where we think that he's not with us. And then when we accept his love, we accept his hand to walk us through it, we can see, oh, you've actually been with me and you'll continue to be with me. And so now I have an amazing community, amazing support system. I'm still learning sometimes on how to allow certain people, allow that support into certain areas, because the journey of healing is not linear. It doesn't just stop because I've had an epiphany. No, now it takes intentional practice for me to do and utilize the tools that I have. And so when it comes to parenting, I am making sure that I am instilling now these values and these tools in my children, especially with them being boys. It is okay to cry. It is okay to experience emotion. It is okay to name what you're feeling because you're not always going to feel that way forever. It's okay to have hard conversations. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. All of the things that I didn't learn and I wasn't taught and I didn't receive and I didn't do as a kid, I am giving them language for it now. And so this journey has been beautiful. It has been messy. It has been scary. I have had a lot of tension through my journey of parenting, but I would not change it for the world. And so some of the things that I received as a child were beneficial. Some of the things I received were not. Some of the benefits that I did receive as a child was learning how to sit with my elders, learning how to appreciate wisdom. That was probably one of the best lessons that I learned because I had to be around older people so much. I value wisdom. I value the elders. And I see that now showing up with my oldest son and even the youngest one. They'll sit with my neighbors, their neighbors, have conversations. And it's beautiful to watch. They're able to assist them with the things that they need. They're able to start to vocalize what they need. Or if they don't have the language, especially that youngest one, he said, I don't know, but this is how I know how I'm feeling. And so I want to leave you with this thought that even though what you may have received in childhood was not always to the benefit of you in childhood, don't just throw everything away. Assess what's necessary, assess what you do need to throw away, and assess what you don't even want to pick up at all. Because pivoting in parenthood is essential. It's going to happen more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times. But as long as you stay committed to the journey of learning, you will be fine, and so will your children. Y'all, don't forget to do the poll at the end of this podcast. I want to know your thoughts. I want to know your story, and I want to hear any suggestions that you might have for a continuation on this topic.